I'm Idris Howell, 75 years old, and for the past 3 decades, I've been waking up at 6 o'clock sharp. My body doesn't ask whether it's a workday or not, it just knows. Today was a Tuesday, my only quiet morning each week. I walked down the stairs slowly, hand on the banister. Not because I was fragile, but because I liked to feel every step beneath me. As the kettle began to boil, I glanced outside at the small patch of garden that refused to be tamed. I'd planted it years ago, when my daughter Beatrice was still home. She once told me it looked stubborn, just like me. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to hold a secret just to protect your peace. The morning light filtered in soft and gray, typical of our winters here in Connecticut. My little house creaked like it always did, each sound familiar, each floorboard telling a story. I moved slowly, not from age, but from habit, making my way toward the kitchen where a pot of loose-leaf tea waited on the counter. My name is Idris Howell, and most people think I'm just a quiet widow living on a modest pension. That's how my daughter and son-in-law see me, how they've always seen me. I've never corrected them, never felt the need. Beatrice calls from time to time, usually when something needs fixing or when their mortgage is tighter than expected. Her husband Lloyd likes to make jokes about my retirement hobbies and the old sedan I drive. He thinks I'm clinging to the past, that I never managed to do much with my life after Alan died. But what they don't know is I've been running one of the finest restaurants in the region for nearly 20 years. They walk past the Pearl of Manchester on their date nights without knowing they're peering into my world. Alan passed away when I was just 42. One morning, chest pains, and then nothing. No warning. No preparation. He left behind a quiet house, a daughter who barely understood what death was, and a mountain of debt I hadn't even seen coming. I had 2 choices, then fall apart or get to work. I still remember the day someone at the wake complimented my pies, said I should be selling them. I laughed at the time, but 3 weeks later, I was standing in a rented kitchen on the edge of town, baking for anyone who'd place an order. Beatrice was 8 when it all began. I'd leave her with a neighbor, promising I'd be back before bedtime. Some nights I didn't make it. I thought I was building something for both of us. I thought she'd understand one day. But as she got older, that understanding turned into silence. She left for college and never looked back. And by the time she did return with Lloyd on her arm and a ring on her finger, it was too late for explanations. I'd already learned that silence was easier. I'd started the Pearl of Manchester as a little cafe, just 10 tables and a chalkboard menu. Ellis was a student back then, bussing tables for a little extra cash. Now he's the general manager and the closest thing I have to a friend. Together, we built the place from scratch. A second location is in the works now, but no one in my family knows that. They think I spend my days clipping coupons and worrying about the heating bill. Every Tuesday, I keep my ritual. No morning meetings, no supplier calls, just tea, soft music, and the quiet comfort of my old chair. But today, as I reached for the framed photo of Alan and brushed dust from the edge, I knew that silence might not last much longer. Beatrice had called last night, said she wanted to talk something about Nell, her daughter needing help with school costs. The tone in her voice wasn't unfamiliar, but the weight in her words felt different this time. As I set my teacup down and prepared to get dressed, I could already picture Lloyd's face, his smirk, his questions, his little digs wrapped in sugar. The cardigan I chose was slightly worn, the dress plain but clean. I kept up appearances always. Because when you've spent 20 years hiding your success from the people who share your blood, the hardest part isn't the lie, it's knowing when to stop. Tomorrow, they'll ask again. And this time, I may not lie. Beatrice called around 5 in the evening, just as I was setting a kettle on for my second cup of tea. Her voice was tight but polite, the way it always was when she had something to ask. She said they wanted to stop by for a quick visit, said it was about Nell's music education. I said yes, of course, even though I already knew where the conversation would lead. I pulled a pie from the freezer and set it to bake, then laid out the good china, the one with the faded roses around the edges that Beatrice once said looked like something from a thrift store. They arrived right on time, the way Beatrice always did, like she was keeping a business appointment. Nell came in first, tall and slender, her hair tucked behind one ear. She hugged me without hesitation, the only one in that family who ever did. "Hi, Grandma," she said, her voice soft but bright. Lloyd followed behind with his usual swagger, one hand adjusting his tie like he'd just stepped out of a meeting. "Still alive and kicking, I see," he said with a chuckle, patting my shoulder. "You look decent for your age." 78, is it? 75? I corrected gently, as I always did. We moved into the living room where I'd already set the tea. Scones, fresh jam, apple pie. I'd even polished the silver tray. Nell's eyes lit up when she saw it. "Wow, Grandma, this is like something out of a movie. Your grandmother likes to play hostess," Lloyd said, settling heavily into the armchair. "Makes her feel fancy." Beatrice stayed quiet, though I saw her glance at the table with something between appreciation and mild embarrassment. While I poured the tea, Lloyd poured himself a glass of the whiskey I kept in the sideboard. "Still the good stuff," he said, lifting the glass. "I'll give you that, Idris. You always knew your way around a bottle." I smiled without responding and handed Nell a slice of pie. "It's delicious," she said, with her mouth still half full. "You really could have opened a cafe or something." "It takes money to start a cafe," Lloyd cut in, "which your grandmother never had. Not everyone's got my financial instincts." Beatrice shifted in her seat. "Miss Pratt did," Nell offered. "She's my music teacher. She opened a bakery last year. She's 65. Lloyd snorted. "Good for Miss Pratt. Maybe she married well. Or maybe her kids chipped in." The pie was warm and the tea was steeped just right, but the room felt tight, like we were all sitting too close to something we weren't saying. Finally, Beatrice leaned forward. "Mom, we've been looking into a music school for Nell. It's a great program, private lessons, conservatory track." "But expensive," Lloyd added. "About $6,000 a year plus. She'll need a decent piano." I nodded, taking a sip of my tea. "And you're hoping I can help?" "If you're able," Beatrice said quickly. "You've always said you were saving for a rainy day." Lloyd leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Come on, Idris. What else are you saving for? You've got maybe, 15 years left? You going on a cruise?" "Lloyd," Beatrice snapped, but not very hard. "We're just asking. It's for Nell. I'll think about it," I said calmly. "I need to look at my finances. You've got some investments, don't you?" he asked. "That old story about Alan's insurance payout," I nodded again. "It's for Nell," Beatrice repeated. "She's so talented, Mom. You always wanted me to have opportunities you didn't." "Don't you want that for her?" I didn't answer right away. The guilt in her voice was sharp, like she knew exactly where to press. I told them I'd call in a few days, then stood to clear the plates. "Let me drive you?" Beatrice offered. "No need," I said. "I'll catch the bus." Lloyd laughed. "Our independent little Idris. Just don't get caught in the rain." They left not long after Nell hugging me again before stepping outside. There was no bus. I'd called a cab as soon as they arrived. Back home, I changed into slippers and poured myself a glass of wine. I sat by the fireplace, staring at the soft flicker of the flames and listening to the quiet tick of the old clock on the wall. I thought about what Lloyd had said, the way he looked at me like I was a bank account wrapped in wool cardigans and outdated furniture. I thought about Beatrice, too, how she only ever seemed to visit when something needed paying for. Her voice always polite, always careful, but never really warm. And Nell, sweet Nell, trying to hold it all together, caught between her parents and the uncomfortable truth they never wanted to face. The next morning, I called Ellis. They came over, I told him, asked for money, again. He was quiet on the other end, the way he always was when he didn't want to say what he really thought. Did you tell them? Not yet, I said, but I'm thinking about it. You should, he said. They don't get to treat you like this. You've earned more than that. Maybe I have, I said. But it's not just about pride anymore. It's about letting go of the lie. Later that week, Beatrice called again. She wanted an answer. Lloyd's tone was less patient. It's just $4,000, he said. You've probably got that in a coffee can somewhere. What else are you going to do with it? I said I'd think about it, I repeated. And I have. On Sunday, they came again, this time, all three of them. Nell was quiet. Lloyd smelled like aftershave and wore a blazer like he was headed to a networking event. Beatrice looked like she hadn't slept. We sat at the table again. More tea, another pie, the same familiar script. I can help, I said finally. Not the full amount, but I can offer $4,000 a year. Beatrice's eyes lit up. That's... Mom, that's so generous. Thank you, Grandma, Nell said, but her voice was small. Are you sure you can spare it? Lloyd's right, I said, keeping my tone steady. I won't be taking it with me. He blinked, then grinned. Well, that's the spirit. I nodded and reached for the teapot. But that's all I can give. The rest is up to you two. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lloyd shrugged. We'll make it work. Somehow. Beatrice smiled, but there was hesitation in her eyes. Nell reached for another slice of pie, and I let myself enjoy the moment of quiet before the next chapter began. Because something was shifting. I could feel it. The years of silence, of letting them believe I was someone else, were beginning to pull loose at the seams. And very soon, they'd see me for who I really was. The week after that conversation, I found myself awake earlier than usual, watching the frost melt along the edges of my window. December had settled in with its sharp winds and gray skies, but I wasn't thinking about the weather. My thoughts circled around a dinner reservation, one I hadn't told anyone the full truth about. Lloyd had gotten the promotion he'd been boasting about, and Beatrice said they planned to celebrate soon. That's when I offered my gift, a dinner for 4 at the Pearl of Manchester, supposedly won at a charity raffle. Lloyd was skeptical at first, but the words free and high-end did their work. He accepted without hesitation. I arrived early that evening, well before the others. I told them I'd be downtown on errands, but really I wanted time to make sure every detail was right. The host greeted me with his usual warmth. Evening. Mrs. Howell James said, his voice low and respectful. Your table's ready. Number 7, by the stage. I nodded and walked through the dining room, slowly letting my eyes take in what I'd built. The light fixtures I'd picked myself, the polished oak floors, the piano tucked neatly near the window, every piece of it held a memory. Ellis met me at the bar, already in his suit tie, perfectly in place. You sure about this? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I smoothed the hem of my new dress and looked toward the entrance. Yes, I said quietly. I am. At exactly 7, James returned. Your guests have arrived, ma'am. I turned and saw them walking through the door. Beatrice looked lovely in a black cocktail dress, her hair carefully done. Lloyd wore a suit that still had creases from the store hanger. And Nell, sweet Nell, looked simple and elegant in a soft cream dress, her eyes searching the room with quiet curiosity. Mother Beatrice called. You look not bad. You clean up, Idris Lloyd added, laughing, as if he were sharing a compliment. Nell came over to hug me. You look beautiful, Grandma. I squeezed her hand. So do you, sweetheart. James led us to our table, and I watched as they each took in the view. Crisp white linens, polished silver, the glow of candlelight. Nice place, Lloyd said, eyes scanning the room. Not bad for a raffle prize. I could see the wheels turning in his head, counting costs, measuring worth. They know we're celebrating, Beatrice asked as the sommelier approached. We make it a point to learn about our guests, he said smoothly, glancing my way. Congratulations on the promotion, sir. Lloyd puffed up, clearly impressed. That's right. Regional manager? The champagne came next, delicate and cold. Lloyd raised his glass first. To promotions, he said, grinning, and to Idris for winning the jackpot. The courses began to arrive one after another. Scallops with citrus-glazed mushroom soup, truffle ravioli. Lloyd commented on each one, mostly to complain. Too small, he said. Too fancy. Nell tried everything, her eyes wide with interest. It's like art, she whispered, after the tartar. Real art. I smiled at her and quietly agreed. Beatrice said little. She watched, nodded occasionally, checked her phone under the table. By the time the lamb was served, Lloyd was on his third glass of wine and beginning to talk louder. You know, Idris, he said, leaning toward me. You really lucked out with this place. Must have cost a fortune. I imagine it would, I replied. But you'd never afford this yourself, right? He added, laughing. Your pension wouldn't cover the breadbasket. Beatrice gave him a look, but not a strong one. Nell glanced down at her plate. I reached for my glass, calm and measured. What else do you think about my finances, Lloyd? He shrugged. Well, you live in that old house, drive a car that rattles, wear clothes that haven't seen a boutique since Reagan. Let's be honest, you're not rich, and that's okay. Just then, Vincent, our head chef, stepped out from the kitchen. He wore his white coat and high hat, a towel folded over one arm. He walked directly to our table and bowed slightly. Good evening, he said. I hope you've enjoyed the meal. Delicious as always, Vincent, I said. Thank you, Mrs. Howell, he replied. It's an honor to cook for you and your guests tonight. Beatrice turned to me, her mouth slightly open. Lloyd blinked, confused. Mrs. Howell? He asked. You two know each other? Of course, Vincent said with a warm smile. She's my boss. Has been for 15 years. For a moment, the table went completely still. Lloyd's face shifted from confusion to disbelief. Beatrice looked as though someone had pulled the rug from under her. Nell, however, was the first to speak. You own this place? She asked. You're the owner, I nodded. Yes, sweetheart. I have been for quite a while, Lloyd sputtered. You always said you were living on a pension. I never said that, I corrected gently. You assumed, and I never saw the need to correct you. Beatrice touched her napkin, folding and unfolding the edge. Why, she asked. Why would you hide this from us? I looked across the table at her. At first, I didn't want you to think I chose the business over you. Then later, I saw how your husband spoke about people with money, and I realized it was easier to let you believe what you wanted. Lloyd slammed his glass down. This is unbelievable. You lied to us. All these years. I didn't lie, I said calmly. I protected myself. Ellis stepped quietly beside the table. Is everything all right, Mrs. Howell? Yes, Ellis, I replied. This is my daughter, my son-in-law, and my granddaughter. Everyone, this is Ellis Brown, my manager and longtime friend. Lloyd leaned back, arms crossed. So, what are you worth then? Beatrice turned sharply. Lloyd, stop it. It's a valid question, he insisted. We're family, aren't we? I met his gaze. Enough to live well, not enough to support those who only show up when they want something. Beatrice opened her mouth, then closed it again. I continued. I could have helped more. paid for better schools, given you more than pies and small checks. But I was afraid that if you saw my success, you'd see a dollar sign, not your mother. A waiter placed our desserts gently in front of us, chocolate fondant soft and rich. No one spoke as we ate. When the plates were cleared and the last sips of coffee were gone, I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. "Now you know the truth," I said. "I'm not the frail old woman in need of your help. I'm the one who built this place, and I'm not going to hide that anymore." Outside, the wind had picked up. The cold air cut across the sidewalk as I stepped into my cab alone. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The next morning started like any other, except for the stillness in my chest. I woke at 6, same as always, but stayed in bed longer than usual. The events from the night before circled my thoughts: Vincent's voice, the silence at the table, the look on Lloyd's face when he realized who I really was. I'd said what needed to be said. There was no taking it back. Around 10, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked through the peephole there, they were Beatrice and Lloyd. Beatrice held a large bouquet of winter flowers, stiff and colorless. Lloyd stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, wearing a tight smile I'd never seen before. "Mom," Beatrice said as I opened the door. "We thought we'd drop by. See how you were feeling after last night." I stepped aside and let them in. "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you for the flowers." They followed me into the kitchen, where the table was already set with a teapot and 3 cups. I'd had a feeling. Beatrice sat first, smoothing her skirt. Lloyd looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. "This place is cozy," he said. "You've kept it the same all these years." "It works for me," I replied. As I poured the tea, Lloyd cleared his throat. "Idris, I just want to say, I may have been a little harsh in my remarks last night." I looked at him. "A little harsh." "Okay, very harsh," he said. "But I never meant to hurt you. It's just how I talk. I joke around. That's my way." I stirred my tea slowly. "I've never heard you joke like that with Beatrice. Or your co-workers. Just me." Lloyd looked at Beatrice, but she didn't say anything. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "We are sorry, Mom. Truly." It was a shock. We had no idea what you've been carrying all these years. I listened without speaking, letting their words settle. "You never told us," Beatrice added gently. "Why did you keep it a secret?" I set my cup down, because I didn't want you to look at me differently. At first, I worried you'd think I'd chosen the restaurant over you. Later, I realized how Lloyd saw the world, who had money who didn't. I didn't want to be treated like an opportunity. "That's not fair," Lloyd said, straightening in his chair. "I've always respected you. Pathetic pensioner, measly interest." "What was it you said, that I should spend my savings before I die?" I asked calmly. "Was that respect?" He flushed. "I didn't mean it like that." Beatrice cut in, her voice softer. "We want to make it right, Mom. We do. What you've accomplished, it's incredible. Truly. And we're proud of you." Lloyd nodded quickly. "It's amazing. You're a real entrepreneur. Built a whole business from nothing. That's impressive." There was a pause, then Lloyd leaned forward. "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe we should spend more time together. Family dinners, holidays. I could show you our house updates, and maybe you could show me more about the restaurant business. I've always been interested in entrepreneurship." I looked at him. "I thought you preferred stability. You said people who run their own businesses are reckless." He laughed lightly. "Well, that was before I saw how successful it could be. Maybe I judged too quickly." I finished my tea and stood. I appreciate the visit, but I need to be at the restaurant by 11. Oh, sure, Lloyd said, rising quickly. Of course. Business first. Maybe we can get dinner this week? Not this week, I said. I've got meetings through Friday. Maybe next. Absolutely, he said, turning to Beatrice. We'll clear the calendar. At the door, Beatrice lingered. Mom, she said quietly. Can I come by tomorrow? Just the two of us? Of course, I said. 4 o'clock for tea. She smiled, and for a second I saw the little girl she used to be. Once they were gone, I stood in the hallway, hand still on the doorknob, and took a long breath. The apology had come on cue. The new warmth, the compliments, the eagerness to reconnect, it was all there. But it felt rehearsed thin at the edges. At the restaurant, Ellis met me at the entrance. How'd it go? He asked. They brought flowers, I said. Apologies, and a new interest in the restaurant business. He smirked. Let me guess, Lloyd sees himself as your protégé now. I smiled faintly. Something like that. We walked together through the dining room, pausing to check the holiday menus, making notes on table settings and weekend reservations. By evening, I was tired, but steady. Just as I was finishing up paperwork in the office, James appeared at the door. Your granddaughter is here, he said. She asked if you had time to talk. I looked up surprised. Of course. Bring her in. Nell stepped into the room, slowly clutching a small bag and a paper notebook. Hi, Grandma, she said. I didn't want to bother you, but I needed to say something. I motioned for her to sit, and she did, pulling the notebook close. I wanted to say sorry, she began, for Dad, for all the times he said things and I didn't speak up. I was afraid it would make things worse. You don't have to apologize for him, I said gently. You're not responsible for his choices. I know, she said, but I could have said something, and I didn't. She paused, then looked up. Can I ask you something? How did you start it all? The restaurant, I mean. So I told her. I told her about Alan's heart attack, the debt he left behind, the tiny kitchen I rented on the edge of town. I told her about the pies I baked, the neighbors who helped, and Ellis, who started as a student waiter and never left. I told her about the years of saving, expanding, risking everything I had. When I finished, Nell stared at me with wide eyes. You did all that by yourself. With a child at home. I smiled. It wasn't always graceful, but I kept going. She leaned forward. I want to help. I don't know how yet, but I want to learn. Not just music, this, cooking, restaurants. I want to be part of it. I reached across the table and took her hand. Then come by Saturday. We'll start slow. There's plenty to learn. Her face lit up. Really, really. As she left, I sat quietly in the office, the lamp casting a soft glow over the paperwork I'd forgotten. Of all the people in my life, she was the only one who'd asked how it all began. The only one who wanted to earn her place beside me. And that changed everything. Saturday morning came quiet and overcast. The kind of sky that made you want to stay under a blanket, but I had work to do. I arrived early to the restaurant, unlocked the front door, and stepped into the stillness of the dining room. The chairs were stacked, the counters wiped down, the scent of lemon cleaner still fresh in the air. I was placing fresh linens when I heard the knock. It was soft, 2 taps, then a pause. I opened the door to find Nell standing there with her coat buttoned all the way up and a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Good morning, she said, her cheeks pink from the cold. Hope I'm not too early. You're right on time, I said, stepping aside to let her in. She followed me into the kitchen, where I'd set out a few basics: aprons, cutting boards, a short list for the day. I handed her one of the aprons, and she slipped it over her sweater like she'd done it 100 times before. We started simple. I showed her how to check the produce deliveries, how to measure the oil levels, how to prep ingredients so they were always within arm's reach. She moved carefully, her hands steady, her questions thoughtful. By noon, she'd peeled 2 trays of carrots, diced onions without tears, and helped assemble 3 batches of dough. At one point, she looked up from the mixer and said, "Is this what it felt like in the beginning?" I paused. "Not quite this organized," I said, smiling. "But yes, the rhythm of it, the quiet thinking, the work. It felt like this." Later, we sat at a small table in the back corner and shared a sandwich. She picked at her bread, then looked up. "I told Mom I was coming," she said. She wasn't thrilled. I sipped my tea and waited. "She said I should be focusing on school, not chasing hobbies, and that you'd gotten into my head." "I see," I said. I told her this wasn't about rebellion. It's about connection. With you, with where I come from. She took a deep breath. And then I asked her a question I don't think she was ready for. I asked if she even knew what your restaurant was called. I looked at her and she met my gaze. "She didn't," she said. "She guessed wrong. Twice." I sat back in my chair. "It's called Ida's Table," I said. "Named after my mother." Nell smiled. I looked it up. I read the old articles. I saw the photo of you in front of that tiny first kitchen. You looked younger than I am now. "I was 23, I said, and terrified." She leaned forward. "And you did it anyway." We finished our lunch and went back to work. By mid-afternoon, she was moving with more confidence, wiping surfaces as she went, folding parchment, neatly adjusting temperatures like it was second nature. There was something in the way she listened, really listened, that told me she wasn't here for show. Around 4, Ellis poked his head into the kitchen. "We've got 2 guests at table 5, he said. "Didn't make a reservation, but they asked for you by name." I wiped my hands and walked out into the dining room. Beatrice and Lloyd were seated, menus open, expressions polite. They stood when they saw me. "Hope we're not intruding," Beatrice said. "We just thought maybe we'd try the famous Saturday lunch." "It's a full house in an hour," I said. "But we've got a window." Ellis brought water and I handed them menus. They scanned the pages like tourists in a foreign country. "Everything looks so curated," Lloyd said. "It's seasonal," I replied. "Local vendors. We rotate the menu every 2 weeks." Beatrice set her menu down. "Nell mentioned she was here today. Said she's learning the ropes." "She is. She's never taken to anything this quickly," Beatrice said. "You know that, right?" "She takes after my side," I said gently. Lloyd chuckled, but there wasn't much humor in it. "She's ambitious, that one. Like her grandmother." They placed their order: chicken stew, house salad, warm apple tart, and ate in near silence. I didn't hover, just passed by now, and then checking in like I would with any other guests. When the check came, Lloyd reached for his wallet. "I've got this," he said quickly. I nodded. "Your table, your bill." They stood to leave, but Beatrice lingered again. "I hope this isn't strange, but could we maybe come again? Maybe bring friends?" "You're always welcome," I said. That evening after closing, I found Nell folding linens near the coat closet. "How did it feel?" I asked. She looked up. "Like I belong here." "You do," I said. "But remember, it's not just about showing up. It's about sticking with it when it's hard." She nodded. "I'm ready." As we stepped outside into the dark, the winter air felt sharper, but lighter too. We walked to the car together in silence. It was a quiet beginning, but beginnings don't need to be loud. They just need to be true. Sunday brought in a slow drizzle and the kind of chill that crept into your sleeves. I arrived at the restaurant before sunrise. The lights were still off, the alley damp, the quiet humming low. I unlocked the back door and started the coffee while the kitchen warmed. Nell showed up not long after wearing a raincoat and knit gloves. She stepped inside, shook off the damp, and hung her coat without a word. We worked side by side most of the morning, prepping for the Sunday brunch crowd frittatas, scones, poached pears. It wasn't until the rush had passed sometime after 2 that she asked, "Do you ever get tired of it?" All of this? I was stacking plates, wiping edges. I paused. Not the work. Some days, the noise. But never the kitchen. She nodded. I like how it feels in here. It's different. Later, she brought out a tray to a couple seated near the window. I watched from the pass-through as she placed each plate, gently nodded when the woman thanked her. She moved with care. That evening, as we closed, Nell lingered behind. She'd started sweeping the entryway when her phone lit up. I saw her hesitate before answering. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice clipped. I stepped away, gave her space, but I could still hear. "No, I didn't forget. I'm staying a little longer." "Yes, I know I said Sunday." Her back was to me, shoulders stiff. "Because it matters," she said quietly. "Because this feels like something real." She ended the call a minute later and set her phone down without a word. "Nell," I said gently, "you don't have to explain anything." She turned eyes a little red. "I think they're worried I'll stop following the plan." "What plan?" "The one where I become exactly who they want me to be." The next morning, I got a call from Beatrice. Her voice was cool, measured. "I understand you've been keeping Nell busy," she said. "She's here because she wants to be. She has responsibilities, school obligations. She doesn't need to be distracted by." "This isn't a distraction," I said. "It's a foundation." There was silence on the line. "She's our daughter," Beatrice said finally. "And we don't appreciate being cut out of the conversation." I didn't argue. I just thanked her for the call and hung up. 2 days later, they showed up unannounced. It was mid-shift, and the dining room was half full. Beatrice and Lloyd walked in wearing coats like armor. I stepped out of the kitchen, wiping my hands. "We'd like a word," Lloyd said. "In private." I led them into the back office. Nell stayed in the kitchen, though I caught her glance as I passed. They didn't sit. Beatrice folded her arms. "She's 18. She's impressionable. And she's getting ideas that don't belong to her." "What ideas are those that she can just abandon everything, drop school, chase recipes instead of a real career?" I looked at them both. "She's not abandoning anything. She's choosing where she belongs." "This isn't about belonging," Lloyd said. "It's about influence. And frankly, Ida, you're undermining the structure we've built for her." I kept my voice steady. "She came to me." "Then send her back." "I won't." Beatrice blinked. Lloyd's jaw tightened. "This is going to end badly," he said. "For her. For you." They left without saying goodbye. That evening, after the last table cleared, Nell asked if we could sit a moment. We took our tea to the back, where the windows looked out on the alley, and the rain left streaks on the glass. "I know they came," she said. "I saw their car." "They're scared," I said. "That doesn't make them right." She was quiet a long time. "I applied for the culinary program at Rosemont," she said finally. The early deadline passed, but I emailed them, explained everything. What did they say? "They said there's still time." I nodded. "Good." She exhaled slowly. "I just didn't want to tell them until I was sure." "Tell them when you're ready." That night, she stayed late. We went over knife-work spice blends, timing techniques. She wrote notes in a little pocket notebook, one she kept tucked into her apron. As I turned off the lights and walked her to the door, she paused on the threshold. "I'm going to do it," she said. "I know." She looked at me. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting them erase me." I opened the door and let her step into the dark. It was just after 10 a.m. on a Thursday. When I stepped into the kitchen and saw Nell at the prep table, already slicing lemons with quiet focus. She'd beaten me in. I glanced at the clock, surprised. She looked up, smiled softly, and said I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get started on the syrup. I didn't press. Something in her eyes told me she had something to say, but not yet. We moved around each other like clockwork, each motion practiced. As I stirred the sauce on the back burner, I finally asked, "Did you tell them?" She nodded. "Last night." I paused, and they didn't say a word at first, just stared at me. Her hands didn't stop moving. Then Dad asked, "Did Ida put you up to this?" "What did you say I told them I made the decision before I ever met you?" "I just didn't know it yet." A silence passed between us, but it wasn't heavy. It was steady, like ground newly solid beneath your feet. That afternoon, I went to grab supplies from the back, and when I returned, Nell was standing at the front window with a folded piece of paper in her hand. She didn't say anything, just held it out. The Rosemont Culinary Institute, her name in bold. "We're pleased to inform you." I wrapped her in my arms before she could finish reading it aloud. A week later, we threw a small celebration at the restaurant. Just a few close friends from the kitchen regulars who'd become family. We lit candles in vintage holders and filled the counter with tartlets and warm cider. Nell stood beside the pastry case, cheeks pink dress pressed, and for once not a single crease of worry across her forehead. After we closed that night, I found an envelope propped on the office desk. My name written in her cursive. Inside was a note, just one line, "I wouldn't have found my way without you." The next day was her last shift before moving. I arrived early to get everything ready, but Nell was already there again. She greeted me with a smirk. "Thought I'd make scones one last time." We worked quietly. Somewhere between folding the dough and brushing the tops with cream, I said, "This kitchen's going to feel different." She glanced up. "I'll visit. I'll hold you to that." At noon, the bell over the door jingled. Lloyd walked in first, then Beatrice. They looked out of place, he in a blazer, she in a stiff scarf knotted too tight. Nell stood straight, shoulders squared. She didn't flinch. "We heard the news," Beatrice said. Nell nodded. "I was going to call. You didn't," Lloyd replied. "You left us out. I needed space." He glanced at me, then back at her. "And what? You're leaving now. Throwing away your future. On food." "It's not throwing away anything," she said. "It's the first time I've chosen something for myself." Beatrice's voice sharpened. "You're being foolish." "I'm being honest," Nell said, "and I'm going." They didn't raise their voices. They didn't cry. They left a few minutes later, saying only that the door was open if she wanted to reconsider. She didn't look shaken when they left. Just quieter, more certain. That evening, after the final plate had been scrubbed and the aprons hung, Nell and I sat out back on the stoop, the sky dusky, the street humming low. "I don't know if they'll ever understand," she said. "You didn't do this for them." She nodded slowly. "I just hope they see me. Not the version they made, but me." I watched her a moment, the way the porch light caught in her hair. "I think you've made it impossible not to." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small brown box. "I made something for you." Inside was a little notebook stitched by hand, the pages blank. "For your recipes," she said, "or anything else." I closed the lid gently. "I'll use it every day." The cab pulled up just past midnight. We hugged outside the restaurant under the same porch light that had been flickering all week. She climbed in, waved once through the back window, and was gone. I stood there for a while after the taillights disappeared, holding the notebook in both hands. Not heavy, but full. The morning after Nell left the restaurant felt too quiet, every echo a reminder of her laughter and light footsteps. I unlocked the front door, set the tables as always, and watched the sunlight stretch across the floorboards. The hours passed steadily, guests coming and going, but I kept catching myself glancing at the clock, half expecting to see her slip through the side door with flour on her cheek, or a question ready on her lips. Life went on. The kitchen kept its rhythm, the staff found their own pace, and soon the routines settled into place. Ellis and I often shared stories from years past, sometimes laughing, sometimes just letting the silence linger. On Saturdays, I wrote new recipes in the little notebook Nell had given me, a habit that brought her closer even when she was far away. A month passed before her first call. She was bubbling over with news from Rosemont, late nights in the kitchen, new friends from every corner of the country, the way her hands had finally mastered a perfect pastry cream. She asked about the restaurant, about Ellis, about which soups the regulars liked best that week. Hearing her voice, strong and certain, I felt the ache of missing her, but also the pride that comes from watching someone you love find their own way. Beatrice and Lloyd called less often. Sometimes there were updates, brief and polite, but the distance remained. I didn't try to close it. Some things take more time than we ever imagine, but I held to my promise, focusing on the people who showed up, the work that gave my days purpose, and the quiet joy of seeing the next generation grow stronger and braver than the last. On a quiet evening, as the staff prepared for closing, Ellis poured us each a cup of tea. We sat together in the corner booth, watching the glow of the city outside the window. He raised his cup and said, "You built something lasting, Ida. You gave Nell the courage to dream her own dreams." I smiled, thinking how true that felt, not just for Nell, but for myself, too. I'd spent years shrinking to fit someone else's expectations, hiding what I'd built out of fear or habit. But letting go, telling the truth, choosing dignity, opened a new chapter. Justice, I learned, isn't always about grand gestures or loud reckonings. Sometimes it's as quiet as claiming your place at the table and welcoming those willing to meet you as you are. As I closed up that night, I found myself wishing that everyone listening might find the courage to stand in their own light, to trust that kindness and resilience carry us further than resentment ever could. And maybe, just maybe, we can learn to measure our lives not by the burdens we carry or the wrongs we've suffered, but by the love we dare to share, even after all the storms. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings a little comfort or courage wherever you are tonight. If you'd like to share your own story or just a word about what moved you, I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, feel free to follow along for more journeys like this one. There's always room at my table.